Yes. Way to go, Dave Grohl.
Dave Grohl?
Yes.
Watch this. I'm your man. I'm your guitar player. When you want to retire from playing guitar, you just want to focus on vocals because you're getting a little dementia. Call me, bro. That is the reason for this whole show.
That's the reason. The whole show.
You got it, Rob. Last week.
It's nothing but an audition.
It is.
That's what the whole show's been about.
I think the ulterior motive is that you want to replace Dave Grohl.
I do.
Boom.
I do.
Mind blown, right? You don't even know it.
It's true. But subversive or right beneath the surface, the reality is true. Has nothing to do with IoT at all. It's about
has nothing to do. IoT doesn't exist. That's
our career in music.
It's all that counts. Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? We could probably make more money busking in Seattle than we would in a single day trying to sell IoT gadgets and connections, right?
I could be down at Pike's Place Market and just sitting there. Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
There really was a spoon man that was down there, played spoons. And that song didn't come out of nowhere, for Chris Cornell and company over at Soundgarden. So it could happen.
It could happen. You never know. I
always see when I think of people busking, I really always think of Santa Monica Pier.
Yep.
There's always
Third Street. Yep.
They'll be the same people year after year. Like we'll go visit, and I'll see the same. I'll recognize them. I'm like, dude, you're still here. I thought you would have made it by now.
No, they're making it there. Do you realize how much money those guys make? It's amazing. If IoT people knew, if IoT people knew how much those guys that are busking make in a single night, okay, just working maybe 3-4 hours, it would blow their minds. They would say, I want to invest in that stock, a busking,
Boom.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And you don't have to worry about a record label. You don't have to worry about, having going into debt, when you make it big, right?
Yeah.
All those guys have to recoup huge amounts of money, millions of dollars of studio time, the nice house, all that stuff.
Just think about how music industry has changed with the advent of just having the fact that you can have a MacBook Pro with GarageBand on it to make sounds and without having Pro Tools or any stuff. I mean, you think a good example of that was Macklemore and Ryan Lewis. 100% him rapping and his buddy created all the rest of the band on a Mac. Yeah. And they created something from nothing, Yeah.
And the software keeps getting better and better. And, they have some apps on your mobile device that are totally, this is like a production tool, it's a media production tool and it's getting better and better.
It is.
You don't even need your laptop. And that's a topic for a different story. But I think today on this episode, which is episode 58 of IoT Coffee Talk.
Wow.
I think we're going to be talking about the grunge of IoT, which is the granola, the health nut part of IoT, right? Which is open source, right? This is where all the granola, high-minded, well, they're not actually, but anyways.
No, you're right.
I don't even know where I'm going with this, but you know what I'm saying? It's the developer. You were right the
first time, man. Open source, it's the grunge of software. It's the mud honey of software. It's the mother love bone of software. It's the Pearl Jam.
It is.
It's the Nirvana. It's not hype. It's not slickly produced.
No. It's the olive colored T-shirt.
Yes. it's software that got sand kicked in its face for years by Microsoft. And then somewhere along the way, it got to be good enough.
Yeah.
In some cases, it's better than commercial software. You know, it's been all over the map, you know. Hey, you know, when giant companies have had to start embracing open source and contributing, you know, that says a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
But you know what? IoT and open source are like peanut butter and chocolate. They really go together. It turns out, you know, I mean, unless you're some giant company like Microsoft or somebody, anybody wiring together, building a IoT solution from end to end, most likely will use maybe all open source components to build the entire thing. And it won't seem unusual to do that. And then, you know what's weird? It's like, you know, how we think about like devices and maybe edge gateways and clouds and platforms and analytics and outcomes, dashboards, whatever. Every bit of that can be used. Every bit of that can be open source, even the hardware, which is kind of a newish phenomenon. The idea that you have open source hardware, schematics.
Arduino,
Arduino
stuff.
I mean, I you know, it's an open source microcontroller, you know,
Raspberry Pi, right?
And so all kinds of people can build their own implementation of Arduino. And then of course, RISC-V is open source hardware. And I feel like every month or so, I see some new stat about RISC-V with just insane performance, you know, just kicking ass in a big way. And so I think it's pretty interesting, you know? I don't know.
Yeah. And I think so here's the thing. I'll just say it. Your end users don't care about whether or not you're using open source or not. And I see some companies just go, oh, we use open source software and hardware. It's like, I don't give a crap.
Yeah.
You know, it's really a developer thing. And it is really to cultivate sort of this grunge culture within the developer community, right? That doesn't want to subscribe to proprietary tools, software, hardware. And it has its place. And I'm going to say something very sacrilegious, and I'm probably going to have a whole army of like open source developers and even half of our friends here on IoT Coffee Talk going after my throat. Is it sort of has its place, right? And it has to prove itself a hell of a lot more than sometimes proprietary software, or if you want to call it the closed ecosystem, the quote unquote closed ecosystems. They're not really closed, but you might call them relatively closed ecosystems. And so I think that's one of the challenges that open source has always faced, even though, you know, we like to use Linux as an example of a software, open source operating system that's become actually very pervasive, right?
Yeah.
But it's not like that stuff happened overnight. And it's not like there wasn't a company called Red Hat that really made it enterprise class, that made it, you know, now telco class, is going to make it industrial class, right? And so these are all these huge hurdles that even open source needs to overcome. But, you know, the interesting thing is there are movements within industrial that are moving the ball, you know, making it's doing what Red Hat did for Linux and other areas, but it's not easy. And so if that's what you're subscribing to, you know, you have to factor that in to the evolution of, you know, your journey, your evolutionary journey for your products and your business, right?
Yeah. I think the good takeaway, I mean, I've noticed certainly the last 10 years, a high percentage of the startups, tech startups, you know, irrespective of IoT, have been open source and using some kind of dual mode, you know, free model, enterprise, open core, different kind of way they talk about it. But you're right. You know, Red Hat led the way. They figured out the business model. How in the world are we going to make money around this free operating system? that this crazy guy in Portland, Oregon, Leonard Torvalds, building this thing. And it just, it always reminds me of taking everything seriously. There are always going to be barbarians at your gate, and there'll be new technologies that will seem unsophisticated, and you'll think of it as a toy, and you won't take it seriously. And I think I've learned over the years in the tech business that you need to take everything seriously. Because I certainly, I spent most of my career at Microsoft, and they used to make a lot of fun about Linux, about how little adoption it had on the desktop for sure. It started getting great adoption on the server, and then of course it's hiding on the biggest selling handsets on the planet. Android devices. Every Android device is a Linux device with a nice little Java wrapper around it. You got to take it all seriously. One day it's going to come eat your lunch. Just like we talked about the Raspberry Pi as a toy for and its education. And one day it's going to eat everyone's lunch, and it's going to be the next PLC. It's going to be the next everything, just wait.
Exactly. And what it does is it takes, it's so funny because you mentioned that a lot of the big players, even Microsoft, is getting into open source and contributing and stuff like that. Is they want to control it, but then there's this tension, right, between the open source community of developers and then the big guys, and they know we don't want you taking over. This is not your game, right? But the problem is it could be their game because it's a game of scale. I mean, you saw IBM purchase Red Hat. That basically takes enterprise class, telco class, industrial class, and then attaches it to IBM, right? It was the traditional, it was the classic walled garden company, right? It was quote unquote the enemy or back in the day. Even though I was with IBM, the company. You
were the enemy.
I was the enemy.
You were the enemy when Microsoft was the barbarian at the gate, right? when it was an upstart.
Well, no, I wasn't with IBM that long ago. That's like friggin' before I was born. But
that was back
maybe not. I was born during that time, but it still ends up being a game of scale when it comes to viable business models, And I think that's the thing that IoT folks, especially the smaller guys, need to also think about. It's like not just about your product. It's like if you're using open source, how do you create sort of this? You have to create your own walled garden of some sort, because you can't just kumbaya your way to the top,
Even though you and we've certainly seen a lot of open source companies try to kumbaya their way to the top.
Oh, tons of them. It's all about kumbaya, but
at some point the money has to come from somewhere.
At some point, you have to let the dogs out.
There you go. That's the quote of the day. I think the good thing about this little session we're going to do today is that today's session is not just about open source and IoT. This is going to be an instruction manual. Anybody?
Is it?
Yes, it is. We are going to tell would-be IoT pioneers.
Oh God!
I guess you can't be a pioneer when we're all in the trough of disillusionment. So whatever you want to call it, we're going to talk about every tier of an IoT solution, from the thing, the hardware.
Oh my God.
To the OSs running on that hardware, to edge. We'll talk about platforms. We'll talk about analytics. We'll talk about outcomes. And we'll give you the recipe how to use open source with every one of those tiers, so that when you've listened to this session we're doing here, you'll be able to go out and build your own IoT solution yourself. I apologize to all my friends and CEOs of IoT companies who will soon be suffering because of all the wisdom we're about to drop on everybody. And they're all going to run out and go, oh, I don't need to buy that commercial solution. My buddies, Leonard and Rob, just showed me how to do it with free open source stuff. And now I'm an IoT CEO.
But
it's going to be grunge IoT. That's what we're. That's what
grunge.
This is all about.
Grunge IoT. Oh my god!
But yeah, so it starts.
So awesome.
It's you can choose to use open source hardware. You don't, and the thing is, you can mix and match all along the way.
Oh yeah.
For sure. You don't have to. There's no purity test here. It's not. This is not like politics. There's no purity test. But so devices. We talk about in order for IoT to hit those big numbers that we're not hitting. People, manufacturers of machines, environmental systems, whatever, they've got to bake in compute, microcontrollers, whatever, storage, aka a hard drive, but not that. Networking of some kind, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cellular module, maybe, Zigbee, Z-Wave. Well, there's so many different ways to do that. LoRa. They're going to embed that and embed it into the machine. If we're talking industrial stuff, or it could be your IoT coffee maker, and you'll have sensors that you will bind to that. That says the coffee maker is this hot, and actuators. I need to change the speed of this motor remotely. But yeah, so yes, for folks out in the world who aren't hardcore industrial people, at least you may have heard of Arduino because it is open source. And other people can, besides the Arduino folks, can make the Arduino Uno or any of the other devices, and then you can, and again, we've talked about. I know you've done a lot of research with RISC-V. You probably sat in on some of the events.
I know the dudes.
That's pretty.
I know the dudes. What kind of statement is that?
Dude, I love that. That's so grunge. This is grunge IoT today. And then you might have some kind of tiny operating system, right? And you already brought up, these different flavors of Linux, kind of embedded Linux, right? We're like slimmed down versions of Linux. We've heard of Zephyr. We've heard of ARM embed, which may not be Linux. There's free RTOS, which I guess is what Amazon acquired, even though it's free. Yocto Linux, that's another one. A lot of folks work with slim down. And so if you played with a Raspberry Pi, they have a variation of Debian Linux. It's called Raspbian. I think they're changing the name of it, actually. Anyway, yeah, so Linux is living down there on these little devices that could be your endpoint.
Yeah.
And then if we move over to the edge, we'll just kind of talk about edge, like gateways.
Wait. Are you going to do something with that cup?
Yes.
Oh, no. I was just wondering if you're going to use it as a prop, because you always use something as a prop to explain. I just wanted to know what it was before you start using the cup to explain what you're going to explain. Oh, no. Oh, crap. See, you and Mark always have the real stuff in your office.
So, yes. So
it's amazing.
If
the only
this
thing I have is this.
If this is the thing, if this is the thing, the IoT thing, in some cases, especially in industrial use cases, you may have like an edge gateway here, because it's possible. A lot of times you don't have these long range IP based devices sometimes, and they need a little help, or you may want to get the data and do some stuff with it long before it gets to your platform that could be in the cloud or hybrid or whatever. But yeah, so this edge gateway here, that's like a little PC. It could be a rugged PC. It could just be a container on a baseband. It could be, for telcos who are doing MEC, edge means a lot of different things these days. But if you look at most of these edge gateways I've seen, made by HP Edge line. Is that right?
Yeah. Oh, now you're plugging HP.
I'll plug Dell. Dell has their edge devices, right? I forgot what they call. They have a special name.
Yeah.
Advantech has been building kind of edge gateway devices forever.
Oh my God.
But what's running on most of those these days is some version of Linux. It's usually either an x86 or ARM architecture, right? And these days it's running Linux. And also, to give one of our buddies some props on a version of Linux that's doing some of that is, our good friend Jason Shepard over at Zedata. Remember, he talked about how they've created the Eve OS. It's a version of Linux to kind of do, we talk about edge native or distributed edge and stuff like that. In the same way you have Kubernetes on servers. Orchestrated edge with Eve OS to support VMs and Docker containers, Kubernetes, things like that. I've worked with my friends at the Eclipse Foundation, and the Eclipse is doing a lot of stuff around IoT. There's this edge gateway, this Kura, Kura, kind of deal to do stuff like that. There's something called IOFog. It's another project they've got doing to help you run stuff at the edge. So there's a lot of activity out there at the edge. So think, the edge could either be a physical edge gateway, a piece of hardware, hardened, because it's more exposed than something in the cloud, for instance. But yeah, all that stuff's typically running Linux these days. You can run Windows IoT Core, IoT Enterprise. You can certainly do that as well. Actually, in the old days, if you open up an Advantech box, router, whatever it is, find a copy of Windows 7 in it. Windows 7 was probably arguably the best software Microsoft ever created. It was so stable.
Liked it.
It was so stable. It was just rock solid. You could use it for anything.
Yeah.
If we go to IoT platforms, which you and I and our friends, we talk a lot about that because a lot of us have had deep involvement in these platforms. The platform is some kind of middleware, telemetry is coming into it. It could be in a private data center. It could be in a public cloud. It could be a hybrid, the server itself is probably running Linux these days. It could be running Windows Server or whatever. A lot of people, if you're running in Azure is actually, the whole thing is built on Windows Server, a variation of that, and a hypervisor for an entire data center. But then the guest OS in these hypervisors, Linux is now outstripping the Windows servers. And then, of course, AWS is 100% open source stuff, right? So there's a good chance you're running Linux servers on your platform, where you got all the way we interface with devices is actually, some kind of communication, but it's usually we interface it through APIs. And the great thing about APIs, as we all know, is it doesn't any OS, any hardware, any whatever, it doesn't matter because it's kind of that high layer 7 deal in the OSI stack. And so it doesn't matter. And so a lot of people use RESTful APIs, or they use MQTT or CoAP. If you're using MQTT, boy, there's tons of open source options for you there, folks. Mosquito, you may have heard of, or HiveMQ, that telemetry is coming in. Usually have to queue it up, cache it, buffer it. Because if you're successful with your IoT platform and customers, you'll have more data coming in than you can handle. And so it's not like the old days where you're building like a website and data comes in and you just insert it into a database. You might overwhelm your database. And so you'll probably use some kind of queuing thing or message bus. And so it's a lot of great open source options there. There's Rabbitmq. Rabbitmq is what we used for Lumada. And it also not only does it support a bunch of wire protocol, AMQP, MQTT, and REST, has queuing, message queuing. It's got a bus. There's Apache. There's Kafka, which is popular. A lot of people use Kafka. I think that was originally created by LinkedIn and donated. ActiveMQ, Pulsar is a new one. It's like a kid in a candy store if you're a total grunge geek. If you go to apache.org, right? Because apache.org has a zillion different open source projects going on.
Right.
And you can just download this stuff. Obviously, you have to know how to use it. You need to learn how to use it. But gosh, there's great stuff there. If we talk about databases, so let's say the data's flying in, I've queued it, I've dropped it a queue, but now I'm going to send it. Maybe I'm going to put it in a database, or I need to manage metadata about the stuff. You know how we talked about the ghost in the shell?
Yeah.
The digital twins, right?
Yeah.
You might use, for the metadata part, you might still use maybe a relational database. And there's good open source relational databases out there. Postgres is a good one. MySQL keeps getting better. There's a forked version of MySQL called MariaDB, actually maintained and by the same folks who originally created MySQL. For those of you who need a history lesson, MySQL was acquired by Sun Microsystems late in the game. And then, of course, Sun was acquired by Oracle.
Oh, right.
And then a lot of people started having weird feelings when that
Yeah, it goes back to what we were talking about before, right? The big guys kind of following up the open source stuff and creating a lot of creepiness.
Yeah. People are like, why would Oracle support MySQL how does that serve them when they want to sell the Oracle database? Of course, a lot of people had weird feelings about Oracle controlling Java as well, right?
Yeah.
They're like, because Java was kind of like the barbarians at the gate and kind of this open thing. So anyway, but Oracle hadn't done anything bad, and they keep enhancing MySQL, so that's good stuff. But you also have these NoSQL databases like Cassandra, MongoDB, CouchDB, and so those NoSQL databases are kind of like they might be sometimes document databases, sometimes name value pairs, or all kinds of graph databases. Maybe they're just storing JSON. Again, like with Lumada, we use two databases. We use MariaDB for the metadata of users, the list of the devices, kind of twin data metadata. But then we use Cassandra because it supported really fast writes. So into Rabbitmq open source to just queue it up. And then we had background processes, daemons, to pull data out and slam it into Cassandra really fast. And so that was a great way to do that. And again, it was all open source. There's this workflows, maybe, or data movement you might need to do, sending data other places. A lot of you may have seen pictures of Node-RED. Node-RED's a great JavaScript tooling. And I've met the guys who created that. They were at IBM, and now they're doing their own thing. Apache NiFi is another one to move data around. Because one of the things you don't want to do when you're building your IoT system is create yet another data silo or data island. A lot of customers get annoyed with that because they're like, I already got a lot of those. I'm trying to combine and pull my data together. And so one of the things that's important is to be able to integrate with a customer's existing, all their business systems, right? Because you might need to talk to their databases, SAP, whatever, IBM stuff, or Oracle financials, whatever. And so you need to, use some kind of tooling to connect to those things. It could be some ETL tools. There's some open source ETL tools. I know Talend had an open source version of that. Pentaho. There's some others. Data management and device management. If you are going to, in addition to data management, kind of what we're describing here, pulling that data in and sending it somewhere, Eclipse has built something called Hono, Hono, to kind of wrap a whole lot of their other open source things together to pull that together. There's also the idea of device management. And a lot of times you think of device management as something like, like what you would do with your phone. And laptops at your company that you work for probably. When you think of your phone, you might think of AirWatch or Mobile Iron, or NetPerceptor, my device management startup from a million years ago. We had an exit. But today, there's device management on IoT devices. Think about your Tesla, over-the-air updates of firmware and software to make your Tesla smarter or more secure, security patches. Not all IoT platforms have that, but some do. It's certainly a valuable added feature. It helps with security for sure. A lot of hardcore security folks will say your device is only secure at a point in time. And then as we move into the future, there could be new vulnerabilities found, in 0 days and things like that. And so Eclipse Foundation has something cool called HawkBit, like a hawk. And it will do device management for you. And so, some of these things are not stuff you have to wire together even. Like HawkBit it's already, you just set it up and turn it on. And so if you need to push, if you think like how you have Windows Update or on your smartphone, you have new updates for all your softwares pushed down to you. HawkBit will do that for your IoT devices. And so you can say, hey, I need to send out new firmware, or I need to update the software, or whatever. And it'll do, they call it like a campaign. Because it's tricky. If you have millions of devices you need to send software to, you can't just say, push a button, say, shoot it out now. You have to like stagger it over time because of like bandwidth considerations and stuff like that. And so it has to be thoughtful about how it pushes updates. And then also the notion of if the update fails or there's a rollback or things like that. Because, we used to talk about how you might brick your smartphone, which is no bueno. And can you imagine if you had really good success, and you had tens of millions of devices and customers loved you. And then you did some update to it and you bricked 10 million devices and all of a sudden none of them worked.
Yeah.
That's a good way to get fired, right?
Yeah.
And probably worse. They'll sue your ass.
Yeah.
Yeah. Analytics. Apache.org is a great place to get open source analytics. Gosh, there's Flink, Apache Flink. Storm is streaming analytics. Sparks does machine learning and streaming, kind of batch streaming. There's Kafka Streams. Samza is a newer one. Machine learning, these different kits. Everyone's heard of like TensorFlow, right? Python has all these libraries built into it. Python's an open source programming language that runs anywhere. It's not terribly fast, but it's probably the go-to language for data scientists. Apache Spark does the ML lib, which is great. Search, if you need to have kind of Google search on your IoT data, there's Elasticsearch, right? Apache Solar, Lucene, things like that. These are how you'll index. This is all funny to you, isn't it? You're like,
no. It's
what the hell, dude?
All off the top of your head. It's incredible.
All off the top of my head. Exactly. It's just, I have this off the top of my head. I'm just like, yeah, it's right off the top of my head.
Gosh.
You've heard of, when you think about big data, everyone's heard about Hadoop, right?
Yep.
HDFS, for petabyte data storage, Apache Hadoop. Anyway, I think our listeners, our viewers get the message here that all this amazing stuff, it's all open source. I mean, these names I'm listing are what most people are using.
Yeah.
For sure. Dashboards, Grafana, high charts, Kibana, Leaflet. There's so many, the D3 JavaScript deal to do charts and stuff. And, there's all that stuff for outcomes. Anyway, I know I've been just kind of on a ramble here, but, I think the takeaway I want for our viewers and listeners is to know, gosh, I can build my entire stack with open source.
Oh, yeah.
And it will cost me $0, at least for the software part, right?
Yeah, licensing and stuff.
Yeah, all these
open
things.
Licensing.
Probably the biggest surprise for people is the fact that there's open source hardware, but certainly open source software is a known thing.
Yeah.
So if you ever, on a weekend, you say, I want to do some Grunge IoT open source development to spend, that's how you want to spend this summer, actually, I know a lot of people
in the Seattle heat.
In the Seattle heat, exactly.
Yeah.
Who would have
Speaking
thought
about baking, you mentioned baking earlier. I was going to say you're baking over there in Seattle, of all places.
Oh, we are baking.
Northwest.
Yeah, we are baking.
Ridiculous.
We had some weird, bizarre phenomenon going on up here, and they called it a heat dome, which sounds like the Thunderdome from Mad Max, right? And so it's like, whoa, the heat dome. People in Seattle don't have any concept of temperature or heat or things like that, right?
We don't have air conditioners, right?
We don't have air conditioners.
Yeah.
And so, that's kind of a problem, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, big time.
Yeah. Whew.
And way too much black hole sun.
I can only hope that the black hole sun will wash away the rain, maybe into the screaming trees. I don't know. Actually, at this point, we would love the rain to come back. We'd like some cold rain to cool things off in Seattle, like we're normally accustomed to. Since I'm asking for it now, it's like, I'm praying for rain. Please give me rain.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. 108 degrees in Seattle, all-time record. And Portland was even hotter than Seattle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, hey, you rattled off all that stuff. It's amazing that it just flew out of off the top of your head. Just completely incredible.
Well, I'm like this IoT shaman,
yes, you
standing on some kind of Aztec temple or something like that.
You're like the black hole sun god of IoT is really what you are. Yeah.
Yes.
But
Right.
there's always a but. There's always a but.
Uh-oh.
There's always a but. Yeah. For the CTOs of these IoT-ish or grunge IoT companies, the thing that you always have to be conscious about is that big list, right? And always making sure that you're engaging or incorporating open source technologies that have a certain state of readiness, right? I mean, that's a huge laundry list of stuff not all of them are created equal. They're not,
that's true.
They're not, at a point of maturation. They're not at the same level of maturity, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think one of the dangers is some of these technologies or these open source softwares or hardwares have a lot of buzz around them, and leading forward with that kind of stuff, it could be a little bit tricky. So I think there's a lot of challenges with being in part of that grunge IoT development community that you have to think forward a bit instead of just looking at the fact that you're part of this bigger movement. There's still architectural and vendor and partner choices that are smart and dumb.
Yeah.
So you have to navigate all that stuff. And, at the end of the day, this has to become, there's going to be only a few scaled partners or players in the space. That's how it always ends up. So, all these people that think, oh yeah, it's going to, open source democratizes everything. It's like, well, no, it kind of gives some folks access to the basic technology, but when it comes to monetization, who gets the revenue share, the profit share, it's going to be a few gigantic guys. And so, this stuff does not end in a big kumbaya. It never does. And so those who think that grunge will live forever have to realize that eventually Britney Spears will start hitting the charts and stealing the number one from Nirvana and
free Britney. Free Britney.
Free Britney. Exactly. So she can take over the charts again, right?
Are you? Yeah. Or you saying
from BTS and
are you saying like towards the end of the 90s, grunge was killed by like NSYNC and Britney Spears?
Yes,
and stuff like that.
That's kind of how I feel.
Yeah. Do you remember like Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake did like a dance off in some club on like Ventura Boulevard or Sunset in Hollywood?
No, but if I did, it's something that I would want to forget.
You probably want to forget that. I think that we're bringing the notion of grunge IoT into the collective consciousness of everyone, all our millions of viewers and listeners, which is great. But you are so right about maturity, because you're right, everything's not equal. You need to make sure whatever open source project and technology you're using has a active, large community around it of contributors and updaters. Because if you pick the wrong one where it's just some guy in his mom's basement in some obscure country and you've got a problem and you need a patch or an update, good luck. That's personally, I've struggled with that notion. Supportability. Supportability. Supportability has always been this notion of why you stuck with a giant commercial company, right? Yeah. Because those big companies would say, "Oh, don't bet on that open source." Some guy in his little obscure country in his mom's basement is the only thing that's going to save you, instead of our army of developers and support people and blah blah blah. But they're kind of right though, a little bit. Yeah. And so you have to have an active community, a big community around whatever software projects you choose to bank on, and supportability. So I'll give you an interesting example that you might be unaware of, folks. So like me building the Moab platform, I used ASP.NET Core. And that sounds a whole lot like it came from Microsoft, and it does, but it's open source and it's cross-platform. and it's supported by Microsoft. And so did I also use it because of a comfort level, since I have code that billions of people are running that I wrote? Yeah, of course. I'm part of that machine there. Yeah. And so, I always give advice to people when you're doing startups, or you got to get something to value fast, market fast, go with what you know. The thing you may use for the real thing later on might be different when you have a big team, if you get funding. But early on, just use whatever you're comfortable with and get it out the door. And so, I know .NET and C# really well over the years. And so I used what I knew. But part of what we talked about, Microsoft embracing open source. But I also, in the back of my mind, is like, supportability is so huge. If something goes wrong, you want to have a throat to choke, right? You need to be able to pick up the phone.
Yeah, and you better have a thick neck. As a company.
Yes.
Otherwise you get choked out.
You don't want to get choked out.
Yeah, man. It's not like friggin' some meditation kumbaya session out there. It's like UFC, It's
like UFC.
Everyone's out there trying to get on the top of the heap to get all that IoT gold. Yeah. You don't get there kumbayaing your way up there, massaging other people, and
you're probably going to get choked out at some point.
Yeah. Dogs, you're going to have to let the dogs out, and the dogs are going to have to eat the dogs. That's the game. It's like ecosystem, schmeecosystem.
Yes.
At some point you got to get real.
At some point you're going to have to enter the octagon.
Oh yeah.
That's an interesting way when you think about it like that, because so many entrepreneurs, founders, people with a great idea, a developer, whatever.
Yeah.
They go, God, I want to build this great thing and I love it and I'm enjoying it. And they build this thing and then they accidentally get successful and they have to build a real organization and they have customers. And then what they didn't realize though along the way is you're going to be on the hook for something. And they're like, oh, that wasn't in the brochure of Entrepreneur 101, go be a Silicon Valley billionaire. And so you will have to enter the octagon, and it is like UFC, and you will have to support that software of your customer, and it can get ugly. It can get real ugly. And if you bet, if the software you use to build your system is not well supported or supported at all, you could be up a creek in a bad way.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think these neo developers, this new generation of developers need to be mindful that the software business is not an easy business. For some reason, they think, oh, I have to pay Apple 30%. Oh, that's a ripoff. It's like, no. What these platform, I hate that term, but what Epic used to do, charge you 30% for you to be on their their marketplace.
Yeah.
What all of these guys did, charging you 30%, is totally justified, because they de-risked a lot of stuff for you. They also gave you a huge channel, a very expensive channel for you to build and execute across yourself.
Yeah.
They have to wake up and understand that this business is not an easy business. That's why, there are very few big players out there that understood the game, were able to play everyone out, Microsoft being probably the biggest one. And so, sometimes when I do hear companies sit there and say, well, we have an ecosystem of partners, and I look at the logos and I go, well, what's really behind this ecosystem kumbaya stuff?
A lot of people love to put logos on the website.
And there's a difference between people who do that, who have game, and then people who do that and actually believe it.
Yeah.
And think that that's something you have to do.
Yeah.
The guys that have game, they put that and say, they know these are my customers, but I need to spin it as, or my partners and my customers or whatever. And I need to spin it as being ecosystem. Whereas then you have this other group of people who kind of believe this whole ecosystem thing and not really understanding that, look, it really boils down to real partners, real customers, and, the dirty art of war in business. It's not hand holding. It's not you're going to be competing. And at some point, all this open source stuff, if you're going to be in there, you're a developer, you're a company, you have to come to this moment of reckoning where you realize that even just because it's open doesn't mean that it's not about competition or race to scale. And also you have to understand what scaling out means, because it's not easy. Not talking about marketing scale or mind share. It's about actual value share. And that's really friggin' tough.
That is tough. You're so right. You're so absolutely right.
You triggered me with the coffee cup, man. It was a coffee cup.
I triggered you with a coffee cup.
Yeah.
You got triggered.
Friggin' ridiculous. Horrible.
Yeah. So do you think we saved the day today for people?
I think you did with rattling off that friggin' ridiculous Buddha knowledge. And you know what? It's amazing. This is the second episode that is not going to be E.
Oh, wow.
Can you believe that? Yeah. Don't ruin it. Don't ruin it. Don't. Awesome.
That's hilarious. That's good, man.
Yeah, it's killer. So I'm out of coffee. I got to refill, dude.
All right. That was
educational for me, man.
We're educating people.
I was really impressed by you. That
teachers.
Is why you are like freaking IoT Buddha.
I'm still waiting for people to send me the millions of dollars for being the IoT Buddha. When does that happen? That reminds me of that South Park episode where they showed all the people who became famous on YouTube and the internet. And they went to a store where they're supposed to collect their internet checks for being famous on.
I didn't see that, but
oh my God, it's hilarious.
I have to pick up South Park again. I haven't watched South Park since like maybe season 1.
it like search for it, like South Park internet famous or something like that. Okay. Because it had all the. Remember, there was the little baby that went around. There was the guy that did the history of dance, like anybody who did something. And it was YouTubers, it was Vine. Today it would be TikTokers. All these people became viral and famous. And then they were like, where do I get my check?
Yeah.
Being famous on the internet.
So I'll tell you what you're doing. I'll tell you what you're doing wrong. You haven't invented the IoT Buddha dance. That is the problem. You need to do that. And you need to do it with Stephanie because she used to be a jazz dancer. You guys pick a gangster rap tune from the 90s. And then you guys just do it. Exactly. And then you will see the checks and the dollars roll in. I'm almost convinced, as much as all this granola or grunge IoT stuff that we've been spewing for the last hour.
So it won't be grunge, it'll be Tupac.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It has to be gangster rap, dude.
Yeah. Because he's our digital twin hologram.
Exactly. All right, my friend. Well, to all of our listeners and viewers, thank you for making it this far. As usual, we rant and ramble, and occasionally there's nuggets, and sometimes they happen at the end. And I think it happened at the end here. Remember, it's all about dancing. It's not about IoT.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's where the money is at. And follow us, subscribe, punch the like button, the share button. And
hit the bell. Go to YouTube.
Freaking share www.iotcoffeetalk.com. And we will see you next week.
Yes. We will also see you on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher and Google Podcasts and like 3 or 4 other podcast thingies out there. Spotify. Yeah. Next to Joe Rogan. We're like right there.
Yeah, and all the companies that Rob plugged, please, if you will, consider donating to Elevate Our Kids. It's a great cause. Just go to elevateourkids.org and you will help put a device and broadband connection in the home of underserved communities and households and families. So please consider doing that, because Rob did you a favor.
Yes. Just send a check.
I think blew you guys up.
Yeah. I think, a modest check of $100,000 each from each of the companies we listed. If you'll go ahead and send that to Elevate Our Kids, we'll love you for it.
It's nonprofit and one of the best causes in the world. They talked about it all day at MWC, of course. Yeah, it was a footnote, but it's the biggest issue that we have: inequality and the digital divide. So
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
That's the only kumbaya that matters.
That's right. That's right.
Yep.
All right, man. We'll see you later, Spoon Man.
Yeah.